Hi, I'm Lou, and welcome to Sherlock Club, where I talk weekly about a different Holmes adaptation within a monthly theme. Our theme this month is old-fashioned film, so today I'd like to talk to you about another influential Holmes work, and one of the first talkies. First, I would like to share our question, and it is, what is your favorite moment in the canon? I actually have a few different answers to this, because I just love it so much. I love, obviously, in 3 Garrett Epps, where Holmes rushes in to save Watson after he gets shot. Obviously, it's just so sweet and gentle. I also adore Charles Augustus Milverton in its entirety, especially the part where they sneak into a house together and come out the other end, only with Lestrade to ask them where the criminals are. Really funny. I love when Holmes is listing his flaws and abilities in studying Scarlet, and how when Watson says that he would never betray Holmes and always compliment him, Holmes flushes up, because that's just really sweet. There are a lot more in the canon, and I can't really choose, but I'm gonna go with those top few for now, and we might revisit the question. Who knows? Now, our diva of the week is someone I'm very passionate about, Mary Morstan. She is one of my favorite characters of all time in the canon. I think she's just so iconic, and she's never done anything wrong ever. She is so sweet and kind and respectful, and she's very strong-willed and brave, and I think that overall she gets a bad rep because she gets in the way, or she's Watson's wife, but honestly, it doesn't even matter. You just hate women, so that's my beautiful argument. I think that she really is a good judge of character and very valuable. She's my treasure, okay? Hashtag sign of the 4 reference. On to our adaptation of the week. This is the Rathbone series. I'm pretty sure anyone who is a longtime fan of Sherlock or on the older side probably knows these. It's definitely a really good series. I also think it's very interesting that in the beginning, it did start off as a classic Victorian adaptation set in the same time, with Watson and Holmes going all over Victorian London, and especially the choice to adapt Hound of the Baskervilles first, as well as the William Gillette play. If you guys watched my last video, you would know all about that. I think it's very interesting also that even though the films did really well, they decided not to pursue that, and they decided to set it in World War II, which was the modern day. Imagine if BBC Sherlock started off in Victorian, like a Bob and Bride, and then it moved to modern. Wouldn't that be kind of crazy? Now, they did do this for very important reasons, which I will talk about now. Now, originally it was Victorian, as I just said, and then they decided to top it because in World War II, there are more important things like killing Nazis. I think we should still do this today. It's a really good idea. And sorry, please don't kill me for supporting violence. That's not nice. Now, they decided also to stop the films and start up a radio show. This starred originally Nigel Bruce as Watson and Basil Rathbone as Sherlock. However, Basil Rathbone decided to quit partway through, and he was replaced. Now, I really appreciate the title cards saying that Holmes was ageless, invincible, and unchanging, because that is truly who he is as a character. He has always been a man of the future in the present day, and I find that really interesting as an approach. I will talk more about that later as well as switching from films to radios. They did switch back to films, and it was bought by Universal, who also bought the rights to a bunch of Doyle stories. Speaking of the stories, many of them were original in nature. It definitely shows off that the new Sherlock films were definitely oriented to a modern audience in a modern and politically relevant setting, as well as deciding to change the canon stories, which they bought the rights for, in order to appeal to that audience as well. This is one of the first adaptations that retells the Holmes stories through a modern lens, and many other adaptations do this, such as Elementary, which sets Holmes and Watson in the modern day New York, Watson, which sets him as a modern-day doctor after the Reichenbach falls. Sherlock & Co., which sets the two of them as two roommates living in London and starting a podcast together. Baker Street, which is about a college Watson and Sherlock living in Canada. And, yup, BBC Sherlock. Another fascinating thing about this series is that it is not produced equally. Fox started with a high production value, but Universal intended it to be more of a B-movie style, so they lowered it for entertainment, and it led to different iterations of the same series with the same actors. Additionally, with the changing of hands throughout, 80 years now, a lot of the films aren't in good condition. However, starting in 1996, they were restored. This took a lot of work. They had to restore the images frame by frame onto modern polyester film, and it was considered very complicated by the poor quality of the films. It must have taken a lot of dedication. You can see in my picture that on the left is restored and on the right it is not. You can really tell the difference. Additionally, the first 4 films, Sherlock Holmes and the Secret Weapon, The Woman in Green, Terror by Night, and Dressed to Kill, now that they're in public domain, they were colorized in 2006. Legend Films colorized them digitally, and they were released, both the color and the black and white films, on DVDs. Now, obviously, a very significant series like this, with so far, most different stories, this was bound to have a big impact on the view of Sherlock Holmes, and it still does today. People thought that Rathbone's portrayal was probably the most famous and that he was Sherlock Holmes, but actually, Rathbone got kind of sick of playing Sherlock Holmes because he thought that while the first film he did was perfect, he felt the rest of the ones that he did were a mere reflection of his original portrayal, and that it didn't quite measure up. Now, you can watch them for yourself and see if you agree or disagree with that, but let's just leave it to the professionals for now. Many different people paid homage to the Rathbone and Holmes series. In fact, there are too many to mention right now, but my favorites, and probably the most interesting ones, are Basil of Baker Street, who used actually Basil Rathbone's name to name the main character, who was the Sherlock. They're both nice, by the way. And the Sherlock Gnomes film also pays homage by initially portraying their dynamic and different characters almost exactly like exaggerated versions of Rathbone and Bruce, which actually they go on to subvert in the later part of the film. I would suggest watching it, probably one of my favorites. It's very silly, but I think that it really shows how the modern view of Sherlock has changed, especially considering Rathbone and Bruce as Sherlock and Watson. So, here's my prompt of the week. Is there anyone you truly think is the character they portray? For literary and comic characters, do you think it even comes close? And honestly, I am going to save the question of Sherlock Holmes for another day because I'm mysterious like that. I think that for a different character, Sam Spade is best portrayed by Humphrey Bogart, and that Humphrey Bogart is the best Sam Spade. If you don't know Sam Spade, he is another detective, a noir detective, and the Humphrey Bogart films are from the 1930s and 40s. I would also save this question because even though I'd just as quickly answer for John Watson, I want to be mysterious about it again. And my homework for tonight is watch maybe a little bit of Rathbone and Bruce. They're probably more interesting because they have, more original storylines set in the modern day, or the modern day 80 years ago. And they're talkies. The William Gillette play I recommended was silent. So, if you'd like to hear people talk instead of just watching their weird facial expressions, I would suggest doing that. I also would suggest watching Sherlock Gnomes because then you can see how they portray the Rathbone-Bruce relationship and subvert it. Alright, that's all for today, folks. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, and please subscribe because I want you so bad. Love you. Bye.